You wake up every morning assuming the world around you is real. You see colors, feel textures, hear sounds, and never question whether any of it actually exists. But what if I told you that some of the greatest minds in history have spent centuries trying to prove something as basic as whether the coffee cup in your hand is really there? Here is a story that'll make you question everything you think you know about perception and reality. Picture Sarah, born completely blind from birth. She has never seen a single color, shape, or object. Her entire understanding of the world comes through touch and sound. For 18 years, she has carried two lucky charms, a smooth marble and a six-sided die. She can tell them apart instantly by running her fingers across their surfaces. The marble feels perfectly round and smooth, while the die has sharp edges and pointed corners. Then, something miraculous happens. At 18, Sarah undergoes surgery that completely restores her sight. For the first time in her life, she opens her eyes and sees the world in all its visual glory. There, on the hospital table, next to her bed, sit her two lucky charms. Here is the million-dollar question. Can she tell which is which just by looking at them? Your gut probably says, of course she can. The smooth feeling should obviously connect to the round-looking marble, right? The sharp edges she felt should match the angular-looking die. But here is where things get mind-bending. This isn't just a thought experiment anymore. In 2011, researchers at MIT actually tested this exact scenario with children who'd been born blind and received sight restoring surgery. They presented these kids with simple blocks. Some they could see, others they could only touch. When asked to match what they felt with what they saw, the results were devastating. They got it right only 58% of the time. That is basically random chance. These children, despite having years of tactile experience, couldn't connect touch to sight any better than if they'd just guessed. This experiment shattered a centuries-old philosophical debate. For over 300 years, two camps of thinkers had battled over this question. The empiricists argued that all knowledge comes from direct sensory experience. You can't know what smooth looks like until you've seen it. The rationalists believed human reason could bridge these gaps. That logic alone could connect the feeling of smoothness to the appearance of roundness. The MIT study seemed to prove the empiricists right. But here is what is truly terrifying. If our primary tool for understanding reality is our senses, and our senses are this unreliable, how can we trust anything we perceive? Think about the color blue for a moment. You see the sky, you call it blue, your friend sees the same sky and also calls it blue. But what if the actual experience happening inside your friend's mind, the subjective, internal sensation they're having, looks exactly like what you'd call red? They'd still call it blue, because that is the word they learned to associate with that particular wavelength of light. But their internal experience could be completely different from yours. This isn't science fiction. It is a genuine problem that philosophers call the inverted spectrum hypothesis. Since we can never climb inside someone else's consciousness to see what their experiences actually look like, feel like, or sound like, we can never know if we're all living in the same reality or completely different ones that just happen to use the same vocabulary. But wait, it gets worse. If you can never step outside your own mind to verify your perceptions against objective reality, how do you even know there is an objective reality to verify them against? How do you know other people exist at all? Right now, you are convinced that you are reading these words, that there is a screen in front of you, that there are other people in the world. But every single night when you dream, you create entire worlds filled with people, places, and experiences that feel completely real while you are experiencing them. You have conversations with dream characters who seem to have their own thoughts and personalities. You feel genuine emotions about dream events. Only when you wake up do you realize none of it was real. So here is the question that should keep you awake tonight. How do you know you are not dreaming right now? You might think this is just philosophical navel-gazing, but consider this scenario. What if you are actually aboard a spaceship, part of an advanced civilization, fleeing some cosmic catastrophe? The journey will take thousands of years, so to make it bearable, your species developed technology to place everyone in stasis pods with neural interfaces that simulate entire lifetimes of experience. Your memories of childhood, your relationships, your entire identity. All of it could be an elaborate simulation designed to keep your mind occupied during the journey. The odds of this being true are probably vanishingly small, but they're not zero, and that is the point. You simply cannot know for certain that anything outside your direct conscious experience actually exists. But here is the one thing you can know for absolute certain: you exist in some form. As the philosopher Descartes pointed out nearly 400 years ago, the very act of doubting your existence proves you exist. You might be a brain in a vat, you might be in a simulation, you might be dreaming, but something is doing the thinking, and that something is you. Yet this certainty creates an even bigger problem. If you exist, something must have created you. Even if reality is entirely simulated, something must be running the simulation. If you are dreaming, something must be doing the dreaming. Where did that something come from? If your parents created you, who created them? If evolution shaped your species, what started evolution? If the Big Bang created the universe, what caused the Big Bang? No matter how far back you trace the chain of causation, you eventually hit a wall. Either something created itself from nothing, or there is an infinite chain of creators, stretching back forever. Both options seem impossible, yet one of them must be true. This brings us to perhaps the ultimate unanswerable question. Does God exist? Now, before you shut down or get defensive, let's approach this like scientists. Most Western religions define God as having three key characteristics: omniscience, all-knowing; omnipotence, all-powerful; and omnibenevolence, all good. But these qualities create logical paradoxes that have stumped philosophers for millennia. Here is the classic omnipotence paradox. Can God create a stone so heavy that even God cannot lift it? If God can't create such a stone, then God isn't all-powerful. But if God can create it and then can't lift it, God still isn't all-powerful. Either way, the concept of unlimited power seems to contradict itself. Or consider this. If God knows everything that will ever happen, then God knows every decision God will ever make. But if God's decisions are predetermined by God's own perfect knowledge, can God ever actually change God's mind? If God can't change God's mind, is God really all-powerful? If God can change God's mind, how could God have perfectly known what would happen? Then, there is what philosophers call the problem of evil. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, why does terrible suffering exist in the world? An all-knowing God would be aware of every instance of suffering. An all-powerful God would be capable of preventing it. An all-good God would want to prevent it. Yet suffering clearly exists. You might argue that God allows suffering to preserve human free will, that people need the option to choose evil in order for good choices to be meaningful. But if God already knows who will choose evil and cause suffering, why create those people in the first place? If everything happens according to God's plan, how is any choice truly free? None of this definitively proves God doesn't exist. It just shows that the traditional definition of God contains internal contradictions. God might exist, but be less than all-powerful. God might be all-powerful, but not all-knowing, know everything, and be able to do anything but not be perfectly good by human standards. Or maybe the entire concept of God, as traditionally understood, is as limited as a blind person trying to understand color through touch alone. Here is where things get really interesting though. What if the entire framework we've been using to think about these problems is wrong? We tend to think of ourselves as separate beings trapped inside our own minds, trying to perceive an external world. We imagine consciousness as something inside our heads, looking out through our eyes like windows, trying to figure out what is really out there. But what if that is completely backwards? Your body doesn't exist separately from the world. It is made of the same atoms, governed by the same physical laws, shaped by the same evolutionary forces. The oxygen you breathe was exhaled by plants. The carbon in your cells was forged in ancient stars. The bacteria in your gut are essential for your survival. Where exactly does you end and the world begin? Maybe the problem isn't that you are trapped inside your mind, unable to access external reality. Maybe the problem is thinking there is a meaningful distinction between inside and outside in the first place. If you are not separate from the universe, but rather a temporary pattern within it, like a wave on the ocean or a flame on a candle. Then, the question of whether external reality exists becomes meaningless. You are external reality, experiencing itself subjectively. In this view, there is no accurate or inaccurate perception, because there is no separate observer to get things right or wrong. There is just the universe expressing itself through billions of different perspectives simultaneously. Your consciousness isn't trying to perceive reality from the outside. It is reality perceiving itself from the inside. This might sound like abstract mystical nonsense, but it is actually supported by cutting-edge neuroscience and physics. Your brain doesn't passively receive information about the world. It actively constructs your experience of reality moment by moment, using incoming sensory data as raw material but filling in massive gaps with predictions, memories, and assumptions. The colors you see don't exist out there in the world. They're entirely created by your brain's interpretation of different wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. The solid objects you touch are mostly empty space between atoms. The continuous flow of time you experience is an illusion created by your brain stitching together discrete moments of awareness. Reality, as you experience it, is already a collaboration between you and the universe. The boundary between subject and object, observer and observed, inside and outside, might be far more fluid than we typically assume. So maybe the reason these philosophical questions seem unanswerable is that they're based on false premises. Maybe there is no problem of other minds, because other minds are just different configurations of the same underlying consciousness that you are. Maybe there is no problem of external reality, because you are not external to reality. You are an integral part of it. Maybe the question isn't, how can I know what is really out there? But rather, what is it like to be the universe experiencing itself as me? This doesn't solve all our philosophical problems, but it reframes them in a way that makes them less terrifying and more wondrous. Instead of being isolated consciousness, struggling to understand an alien universe, you become the universe's way of understanding itself. You are not trapped in your mind. You are reality dreaming itself, awake through your eyes. The next time you look at that coffee cup in your hand, remember, there might not be a you holding a cup at all. There might just be one seamless process of experiencing, temporarily organized into the pattern you call your life, participating in the vast, ongoing conversation that reality has with itself through every conscious being that ever exists. And maybe that is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived.